This is Josh Findlay with the Election Protection Podcast, where we talk all things election integrity. We are joined today by Congressman Keith Self from Texas's 3rd Congressional District. Congressman, it's great to have you.
Great to be here. Thank you.
So, Congressman, you've got quite the impressive background. You come from a military background. You were in the Army, and you represent a fairly populous area in Texas north of Dallas. Mm-hmm. Tell us a little bit, though, about how you got involved in politics. And particularly how election integrity became an interest to you.
Well, I got interested in politics while I was in the Army because I served both in the embassy in Cairo. So we had Codels come through. So I got to see Codels. And then I was in the Pentagon, and I spent a lot of time over in the old executive office building in the White House complex as a joint staff representative on an NSC committee. So I got to see members of Congress and staffers, and it got me interested. So I went home to Texas, ran years ago for Congress, but did not win that race, became the county judge, the head commissioner's court judge for 12 years in Collin County. And then a couple of years, about 4 years ago now, I was asked to run for this position after I had retired as the county judge. So here I am.
Quite the retirement.
Yeah, yes, it is. I flunked retirement.
Well, great. It's good to have you. And just tell us, where did the interest in election integrity come from?
Well, as I said, I was the county judge in Collin County, mm-hmm. and we were well known for being the rule of law county. How many times did I hear somebody in our jail say, I wish I had committed this crime in Dallas County? Because we have a tremendous DA, we have a great judiciary in Collin County, and election integrity is one of those issues that the rule of law must take hold. It's got to be there, and so we had a great elections administrator early, but then an election administrator from Dallas County had been let go because he was too honest. And so he took a little job knowing that our job would open up. He turned down the state elections administrator job in order to wait for Collin County. So we have had an emphasis and a great track record on election integrity in Collin County for years.
Well, I want to talk a little bit about that later in this podcast because Collin County is doing some fascinating things with election integrity. But I think first, let's dive into some stuff that's happening in the federal government right now. I think the big thing is the president has come out recently a couple of times and made statements about mail-in voting and the weakness of it and his desire to just get rid of it entirely. Where do you come down on the president's statement about mail-in voting, and what can we do about that?
Well, I will start at a higher level because I think that, first of all, we do not want the federal government running our local elections. Let's set that on the table first. Having said that, we do need minimum federal standards for election integrity, election protection, to make sure that only U.S. citizens are voting. Now, for mail-in voting, it is notoriously weak. It is a weak link in the system. There's no doubt about it. But we do need some mail-in voting, mail-in ballot voting. Our deployed military. I was in the military for 25 years. I have used mail-in ballot voting myself when I was deployed. So we must have it for that. But once you get past that and maybe some disability, I'm with the president. I think the mail-in ballot is a weak link in the system, and we need the minimum, as I say, and I may use this frequently, the minimum federal standards to make sure that we do have secure elections.
Well, I think we can all agree that we don't want a federal takeover of our elections.
No.
That would be an absolute disaster. The president has talked, though, about making some changes to mail-in voting through executive order. How do you think that would work? I mean, my view is it would probably lead to litigation, but what are your thoughts on an executive order on this?
Well, I think that there are parts of the executive order that we're referring to that would lead to litigation and might not survive. Having said that, I think that there are, again, minimum federal standards that we can say that set some minimum standards for mail-in ballot voting. But I will tell you, I think that you are exactly right when you say that some of that may be a bridge too far, may lead to litigation and not survive. So I want to make sure that whatever we do survives and sets that minimum federal standard.
Well, and I think if nothing else, it's important that we draw attention to the weaknesses in mail-in voting. We're coming up on a presidential election here in 4 years, and we remember what happened when mail-in voting was expanded so much in 2020. And so I think at least highlighting the weaknesses is very important.
Well, we no longer have COVID as the excuse.
That's right.
So we need to set that aside, and we need to say we need to go back to, first of all, the state laws, because many governors unilaterally change state law. My own state is not entirely devoid of that, but we need to make sure that we no longer have that excuse for the weaknesses, tolerating the weaknesses in mail-in and other election day and early voting days and so forth. So we need to make sure that we no longer hide behind COVID. It's over. Let's be done with it.
That's exactly right. We agree with that 100%. Now, the president did already he already made one executive order about election integrity. It had to do with the Election Assistance Commission. Have you gotten any feedback from your local election administrators on that, on how that will be implemented? Or do you have any thoughts at this point on how that will affect our upcoming elections in 2026?
Well, I think I have not received any feedback from the local folks, but I think at the minimum, it has brought President Trump's attention. Now, President Trump is a force of nature. That's right. So when he brings attention to any subject, people pay attention. And that's probably the best thing that's happened. Just making sure that people are going to now be saying, maybe I ought to check my processes. So, yeah.
That's right. On this podcast and what we do with election integrity, we think that process is probably the most overlooked part of our elections, what happens at the local level. And, an executive order about that was music to our ears. It was something that we wanted to hear. Let's dive into what's happening in Congress a little bit, something a little closer to home. Now, you're a co-sponsor of the SAVE Act. Mm-hmm. Right now, I'm not sure if you're even aware of this, but the Tea Party Patriots are doing a bus tour to promote the SAVE Act all across the country. This is something that I think grassroots activists are trying to keep on the mind of members of Congress. Tell us why you support the SAVE Act, why it's important, and why we need to take action on this very soon.
Not only do I support it, 6 days into my first term, back in January of 2023, I filed a bill that essentially does what the SAVE Act does today. It didn't go anywhere at that time, but now the SAVE Act has been passed by two Congresses, 118th and 119th. And I don't think we're going to give up until it passes. I appreciate the bus tour you just referenced, and I hope that it's successful. But this is something that we must get done because it's a foundational principle. Only U.S. citizens in a secure election elect our representatives in a republic, because we're a republic, not a democracy. So if we're going to have a republic, we're going to have the people in office that are selected by the people they represent who are U.S. citizens. So the SAVE Act does exactly that. And that's it is a cornerstone of a republic, because a republic relies on elected officials who are the representatives of the citizens. And in order to have a fair election for that, your elections have to be secure and they have to be only U.S. citizens. Vitally important bill. This is a vital bill for the future of our republic.
Well, and I think it's important to note, I think it's the Honest Elections Project that did polling on both voter ID and only citizens voting that showed across the board this is an 80% issue. Republican, Democrat, everybody, 80% of the people support both of those issues. And it's already passed the House at least once, right? Twice. That's what I thought.
Yes.
Right? It's passed the House twice. So we really need to lean on the Senate at this point to get this done. And while we've got a Republican majority, it seems like the time to strike.
Well, it's not only the Republican majority. If it's an 80% across bipartisan issue, then surely we can get those 10 Democrat senators to support the SAVE Act in the Senate, because that's what it's going to take. The filibuster requires 60 votes, so we need 7, I guess. We need 7 Democrat senators to support it. You would think that would be a no-brainer if it's an 80% bipartisan issue.
That's exactly right. So you're also a member of the House Election Integrity Caucus. What are some of the priorities that the Election Integrity Caucus has been working on recently?
Well, they're the normal ones, purging the voter rolls to make sure that, and it's not just illegals we're talking about here, people that have moved, people that are no longer authorized felons, people that are dead. A clean voter roll is important. Then voter ID. Then how do we protect in my own state, between the early voting ends on a Friday, we don't vote till Tuesday. So that's a week period. So all of that, and then the SAVE Act. So they're the normal things that you have to do to protect your election. So all of those are important.
Well, this is just coming to me, but being a member of the House, you had some members in California whose races weren't decided for weeks after the election in the fall. As members of the House, I know it's governed by state law and California law allows that, but have you put any thought into hopefully resolving some of these races earlier for your colleagues?
Well, speeding it up is one thing, but accepting ballots after Election Day is the worst sin, because Election Day should be sacrosanct. Early voting, we'll set that aside for the moment, but Election Day, certainly you will not accept any ballots after Election Day. There are states that do. That is ripe for fraud, for abuse. So that should be a focus on Election Day. Now, speeding it up, I don't think there's any excuse for states to take weeks to count. I mean, that's ridiculous, and I'll just leave it at that. The states need to clean up their act to count faster.
Ridiculous is a good way to describe it. That's for sure. Last thing at the federal government level, the Department of Justice. This is a tool that election integrity advocates we now have on our side. For a long time, the Department of Justice was kind of working against, I would say, transparency and security in elections, but now they seem to be promoting those two values, specifically by doing a lot to clean voter rolls. They've requested voter rolls from, I think, 12 states. Give us your analysis of kind of what the Department of Justice's role in this and what we can hope to see from the Department of Justice on this, and maybe congressional follow-up when it comes to some of these issues.
Well, when you talk about the Department of Justice, you're talking about the rule of law. Mm-hmm. And everyone has the rule of law that your voter rolls are supposed to be clean. So this again is an obvious act for the Department of Justice to say that the law says you will have clean voter rolls, and there's people that need to be removed. So it's simply, in this case, in the voter rolls, it's simply a case of monitoring to make sure that the law is being observed, because that's what the Department of Justice does. And it's important to note the rule of law, because when we get into elections, they're very contentious. There's no doubt about it. But there are still laws on the books that need to be observed, regardless of how contentious elections get. And that in the voter roll, the question you ask should be their role to monitor the rule of law.
I think that's a great way to talk about the Department of Justice's position. And it's something that we've lacked so much. We see these local election administrators. The big complaint that we always hear is, we see over and over again, elections run poorly in Harris County, Texas, and Maricopa County. But there's no accountability when these election administrators do a bad job. I think that you just described perfectly the role of the Department of Justice, and that's making sure the rule of law is followed, making sure the rules are followed. Well, thank you for that. Well, let's dive into something a little closer to home with some local elections in Collin County. Collin County just voted to go back to hand-marked paper ballots. Mm-hmm. What kind of changes did they have to make to do that? How was Collin County? And I bring this up because this is a hot topic in Texas right now. Hand-marked paper ballots, and also, and we can go into some of this if you want, hand counts on the back end. So what has Collin County done for their elections, and what kind of changes did they have to make to that process?
Well, they do have paper ballots that are marked manually. It's an important point, so that everyone can see their ballot and how they marked it. Now, That doesn't mean that user error is not going to be there, because user error is happens, whether you're using a machine or whether you're using a paper ballot.
Right.
But in Collin County, there are not paper ballot counts. You insert your paper ballot into a counting machine so that it counts it, but you have the preservation of your marked ballot, which means that you can audit it. If you go back to the executive order that we talked about earlier, it talked about you cannot have your ballot simply in a QR code or a barcode.
Right.
That's important. That's very important, because you have a verifiable, auditable ballot that you can count. So that's all that Collin County has done. So the counting will still be done, but it can be backed up if there are questions with a hand ballot count.
Now, a lot of people see this as a way to build trust. Some people see it as a way to introduce more variable into the election process, right? If you got more people hand marking, that means that circles may not fill in completely and things like that, which means more ballots get kicked to adjudicators and things like that. What are your thoughts on the security of hand-marked paper ballots versus the transparency issue that you just described?
I come down on the verifiable, auditable paper ballot. Because, look, there are going to be mistakes made. There's going to be fraud in every system. Mistakes and fraud are both going to be there. What we need is, first, the confidence of the voter, and secondly, the best process, the best system that we can have that secures the election. The balance between those two always falls to the confidence of the voters. And then it's up to, as we talked about earlier, the people who run the system, to include the DA, the legal system, to make sure that the system, the processes, are as secure as possible. So I come down on, I like the change. I really do. And I think they have answered the question about how slow the count will be by using the counting machine.
Right.
So as long as that is secure, I think it's a good system.
I agree with that. I think being able to see your vote on a piece of paper, it's like getting a receipt for something, right? You trust a transaction more when you can see a receipt. Hand-marked paper ballot is the same thing.
Right.
Another change that's happened recently is there was a court decision that upheld the Texas law requiring ID requirements for mail-in ballots, as opposed to, signature verification or something like that other states use. Why is this change important?
Think about every transaction that you make. You have to identify yourself. This is one of the nonsensical arguments made by the left, that you should not have to identify yourself. Voter ID is again a foundational principle to make sure, back to U.S. citizens who are supposed to vote in that election are the ones voting. It's a real simple question to me. Every transaction you do, you have to identify yourself. Why not when you vote?
Well, you put it that way, it makes a lot of sense. Now, one thing we talk about on this podcast a lot is that a vote should be a transaction between the person and its government. And we can process transactions all the time. When you're buying something from Walmart, we do it with paper, we do it with plastic, we do it electronically, we do it in person, all of these variables, and we trust that things are going to be counted properly. Votes should be done the same way, and having a voter ID like that, I think, is a good way to do that. Mm-hmm. Congressman Self, you've been incredibly generous with your time, so I'm going to ask you one last question here. Thank you for joining us. We're a think tank. We like to be predictive. I'm not asking you for results here, but as we go into the midterms, what can we expect election integrity-wise to see in this country? We're in unprecedented times. We've got an administration, and like we talked about, Congress and Department of Justice that seem to be supporting election integrity, but laws are run by the states. What can we expect to see for the midterms regarding election integrity? Can we have hope for more secure elections than we've seen in the past?
Well, this is a state-by-state issue. It's not a national issue, so it's not one answer. Look, there are states that want as many people, legal or illegal, whatever, to be voting in their election. I think they will continue to lack voter election integrity. There are states that have taken to heart what is happening, and they want to clean it up. So this is not a one-size-fits-all. There will be states that will continue to evade election integrity laws. There are states that will do better. I think that Texas is one of those states that's doing better, but there are other states that are not. So it will be, as it always is, between the laboratories of democracy, the states, it is a mixed bag.
That's a great answer. And that means we need to stay vigilant.
We do.
Congressman Self, thank you for joining us. Where can people find out about the work that you're doing and your office's work?
Well, I would encourage people to sign up for my newsletter at keithself.house.gov, and you'll find out what we're doing both in the district and in D.C. Once a week. And on social media, it's whatever the tagline is, Rep Keith Self. Whatever the particular tagline, Rep Keith Self. Thank you.
Perfect. Representative Self, thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
This is Josh Findlay with the Election Protection Podcast. Thank you.